Hey, good morning, everybody. Welcome to Wednesday MLB Talk. I'm your buddy Chapadong, and I am here with a two-part video today. I want to address something that was asked by some of our VIPs at DFSArmy.com. If you've never heard of us before, thanks for tuning into the video. Like, subscribe, all that good stuff. But most importantly, consider becoming a VIP and taking on some of the coaching that we offer our VIPs every single day to make them better DFS players. Every sport, every site, every format, everything is included. When you become a VIP at DFSArmy.com, there's a link down there in the comments section. So while you're down there liking and subscribing the video, why don't you go ahead and give that a look as well? And we'll talk a little bit more about some of the questions that were asked of me to kind of go into. One was building the optimizer for a single entry lineup, and my answer was very simple. You're going to have to use a combination of hand building and the optimizer. I'm using the optimizer more for taking a look at thoughts and where things might go. And if you've been following these videos the past couple of days, there was a video I did recently where I was kind of talking about using the information that the public is using and applying it to your thought process and maybe getting a little bit different than what it is they are going to do, because most of the casual recreational players out there, those that are not seeking out this type of information, whether it be Google or membership to a website or whatever, are typically not doing a lot of research. They're going with their gut. They're just wanting to get some action tonight. They're just wanting to play the game. And they're using all of the information that the websites are throwing at them, from guru picks on FanDuel and whatnot to anything they find on Twitter and whatever else. Now, some other people are going to take that next step. They might look up a website and start using an optimizer. From there, they're going to get the same type of information because the projections don't really change from one site to the next. You're not very often going to find Christian Yelich projected at 4 points on one site and 35 on another site. They're mostly going to be around, 11, 12, 13 points or something like that. Now, he's going to be higher than somebody who's a lesser player that's down at 8 points versus somebody who's down at 5 points. But the guy even at 8 points is generally going to be in a fairly tight channel of projections. He's not going to be 2 points somewhere and 20 points somewhere else. He's going to always be showing roughly the same number. So that leads everybody into the same down the same track and into the same types of lineups. And if you're building a single entry lineup, you're going to get leverage by getting away from that, because the chalk fails in baseball more than any other sport. And you're going to need to use that information against the field. And this is kind of how I would go about doing it. And then we'll talk about pitching and kind of today's slate as we go. But the first thing I would do is set up an optimizer. Say you're using FanDuel, main slate. Take a look at some of these games. And it looks like this is last night. Yep, 28. I need today's slate. See, good catch by me, right? So while we let that load up a little bit, I'm going to double check some of these games and whatnot, and I'm going to look for implied run totals. I should see some Detroit. I should see some Los Angeles, some Minnesota. Those types of situations, I'm going to go ahead and click. Well, I guess I shouldn't click them off because they're not playing the Marlins anymore, so they'll be back on. They just don't have a line yet. So these are places people are going to go. It's very easy for people to look up implied run totals and just stick with those that are supposed to score the most runs. So I would be looking for stacks in those areas. I might take less exposure to those teams and hope they fail. Now, if you'd done that with the Angels last night, wouldn't have worked out so well for you. But again, the object is not to score the most points. This is a weird concept to wrap your head around. The object is not to score the most points. The object is to win. Yes, oftentimes you win by scoring the most points, but you can do it in suboptimal ways, because if everybody saturates their thinking in the same area, you need to step outside of that herd a little bit, because when that in a volatile sport like baseball, when that herd fails, 20, 30, 40% of those lineups become dead money. They fall right out of the books. And that now, instead of battling with 40 or 50 or 60% of the world, you're probably battling 10%, 20% of the leftovers that were on the right train of thought that night. And that's what's it's easier to beat 10% of a 100,000 person contest than it is to try and beat 40% of a 100,000 person contest. So leverage is gained by stepping away from the herd and not focusing on the optimal what's most likely to happen tonight, but really focusing on where your leverage can be gained with what everybody else is doing and where can I go somewhere else. So the first thing that I would do is I would run about 50 lineups. I would spread out some unique players, 3, 4, whatever, it doesn't matter much, and I won't touch much else. I might switch to tournament mode to kind of shuffle things up a little bit, but what I'm looking for is an overall exposure of players. I want to see what teams, what players at what positions are starting to pop in the optimizer. Then I'm going to extrapolate that information. If I had access to other sites, I would go there and do the same thing with their optimizers to see if they're giving me similar results. And if everybody starts promoting, the New York Yankees tonight or the LA Angels or whatever else, then I know that that's where most people are going to go. And I'll show you another little trick. If it's up today, it might be, it might not be. But reading our optimizer for single entry hand-built lineups is still a pretty important part of your daily routine. No ownership projections yet, so the second part won't work. Maybe I'll tell our VIPs how to do that later. How many lineups we got? 23. While that's going on, why don't we dive into the research station and show you this bad boy. What I would do here in the starting pitching tab with these guys is I'm going to knock out those that are not on the main slate. This is where it started yesterday. I don't know if that's where it starts today yet, but if I knock these guys out, then I'm down to basically the main slate. So forgive me if I have an extra game or two in there or if I left a game or two off. This is just an idea to show you how I would use this tool while we're waiting for the other optimizer to kick in. Now, this K-score section in Chop Shop is strictly the pitcher's strikeout percentage and the opposing team's strikeout percentage added together. Okay, so if I get a high strikeout pitcher like a Garrett Cole, strikes out 37% of the people, and he goes up against a team that strikes out 20-something% of the time, he's automatically going to be striking. The combination is 50-something%, 37% plus 20-something%. It's going to get me 50. I drop the decimal point and boom, I get a 58.8% or 588. That's all that number is. It's not a secret. It levels the playing field though. It compares apples to apples. It allows me to compare Garrett Cole's ability in his matchup to Chris Paddock's ability in his matchup to Sonny Gray's ability in his matchup. And I can see that based on their strikeout numbers, which is a predictive stat in baseball, strikeouts probably the most important stat that you can pay attention to for DFS fantasy scoring. I'm looking at Garrett Cole having the best matchup on the slate, then a Charlie Morton, then a Jacob deGrom, then a Chris Paddock, etc. I look for numbers over about 500. Doesn't mean I write all these guys off. I'm looking for the best combination of strikeout potential, price, and Vegas odds. I want Vegas to be in support of the team, right? And since I don't have that number in my research station just yet, I'm going to go by price. I've sorted these guys to the top, and here's who I would be looking at tonight. 11,000, that's a lot, right? 9,400 for Charlie Morton's pretty damned attractive, being that he's the second best strikeout matchup on the slate. Now the question in Tampa Bay is, how deep will he go in the game, right? Chris Paddock, 9,700. Okay, I'd probably take Charlie Morton over him for even, $300 cheaper on FanDuel. On DraftKings, look at how that changed. 8,400. I would switch and probably do the 8,400 and Chris Paddock. So I'd probably put Chris Paddock over on my DraftKings list and Charlie Morton over on my FanDuel list. I would come down here to say a Rich Hill who's about the same on both sides, and I'd be scared that Rich Hill may or may not go deep in a game. But look at this. Fifth most strikeout potential on the slate, and look how dirt cheap he is. I would, in my optimizer, put some sort of a projection boost on him, and if I'm only going to want, say, 30 or 40% of any single player, if I made 100 lineups tonight or whatever, that's about the exposure that I would want, then I'm going to want to boost his projections up to the point where he's going to be in 30 to 40% of my lineups. Then I'll let him fade on off so I don't get too overly exposed to him. These are all concepts we talk about inside DFS Army. Andrew Haney might be another option. Down here, some guys like a Sonny Gray might be a little overpriced for his matchup. He might not be in an advantageous situation strikeout-wise tonight, so he's a little overpriced compared to these other guys that have better strikeout potential. Can he win the slate? Of course. So if I was making 100 lineups, I'd probably have some exposure to him. If I was making 5 lineups, I probably wouldn't. I'd probably be stuck up in these guys that have a little better chance. Does that make sense? But this would be a contrarian play in a single entry type of tournament. He can still be a good pitcher on any given night. It's just a matter of whether or not he does it. And if these guys get roughed up a little bit or go short in their starts and Sonny Gray goes 7 innings and has 6 strikeouts or 9 strikeouts, well, maybe he's the guy that you're looking for that night that wins that single. This is how I would use one of those pivots. Not many people will go to him if they look at these other names up here at the same price point and see him in a lesser situation. So that would sort of be tip number 1. The other thing that I would do is I would go over to the batting matchups page. We'll go back to the optimizer here in a minute. It's probably done. And I would obviously do the same thing. I'm going to knock these teams off of here. Whoopsie, missed one. Darn it. Now we're going to have to wait. I misclicked. Sometimes it happens. So I just go back and do it again. Dang, that stinks. Probably because I turned that little box blue somehow. Don't know. Never done that before, but whatever. Live radio, right? Come back all the way over to the chop. You can see all the other stats. You can look at all these if you want to. I focused for batters on W score. Uh-oh. What's the deal here? Let me sort by my W score. There we go. I go descending order. And that brings all the big W scores up to the bat. See, K-score works for strikeouts. High strikeout pitcher facing a high strikeout team, his K-score is going to be off the charts because it's an obvious matchup for high strikeouts. W score is the opposite. It's WOBA. I would take the WOBA of the player, and then I would take the WOBA allowed of the pitcher, and I would add those together. And let's say I've got a WOBA of, 350 for Hosmer and a WOBA allowed of 300 for the pitcher, then I've probably got a 600-something Eric Hosmer staring at me. Looks better than that tonight. Anything over about 580 has proven to be pretty good. You got a lot of players to pick from in that 580 range. But now that I've got them sorted out by sort of who has the better matchup in terms of the hitter they are versus the crappy pitcher that they're facing that allows a lot of WOBA against, now I can come over here and I can do the same thing. I can start looking for salary discrepancies. If I really want to, I can kick on and just look at the catchers. Who are the best catchers on the slate tonight in terms of their quality hitters and they're facing a pitcher that struggles and gives up a lot of basically fantasy points, right? So Francisco Mejia, small sample size, but Francisco Mejia might be one of those guys. Mitch Garver, definitely one of those guys. Gary Sanchez, Omar Narvaez. Okay, these are guys that I'd be focused on tonight, these top 3 or 4 guys. Look at the drop-off after that down to 506. I can come back over here. I can do it again for first base. See if I can find a typically shallow position for you here real quick. 709, 609, this is fairly deep. This goes all the way down to 580-ish, down about 5, 6, 7 spots. So first base is obviously pretty deep. What do you do when you find that deep position that has lots of playable options? That's where you take your salary savings in a single entry type of tournament. Everybody else is going to pay up. They're going to be like, ooh, give me Pete Alonso. I'd fade the shit out of him. I'd be looking at Miguel Sano. I mean, I'm going to take my money. I'm going to spend up where it's necessary. Usually second base, shortstop, those are pretty shallow positions. We'll see if it works tonight. It might not. It's a big slate. 690, okay, so we're down to, so about 3 positions and then a couple of, playables. But instead of 6 or 7 or 8 names to look at in that, 600, 580 or over W score range, I'm down to 3. Profar, Greg Garcia, I don't think I would really consider, but if he's got a high WOBA against and Johnny Cueto's given up a ton of WOBA against, then I might take a look at that. But Robinson Cano, these again, this is where I would typically pay up. It doesn't look like the option tonight exists, but this might be where I would pay up for a DJ LeMahieu, a Jose Altuve. Altuve is obviously going against a pitcher that has, not given up a lot of WOBA, so his score is suppressed. Again, making him a pretty good contrarian GPP play. Not a lot of people are going to dip this far down into their research to find him. They're going to be focused on these guys up here in the obvious spots. So when people are paying down, I like to pay up. I might put Altuve in a contrarian type lineup situation. So these are kind of little tips and tricks that you can use, and you're going to think, the optimizer is probably not going to throw us a lot of Jose Altuve. Let's go look. If I scroll down here to my 50 lineups and I click on second base, oh, no Altuve at all. See? So very few people around the industry are going to have Jose Altuve in their lineups potentially tonight. He's probably going to be rather low owned. Now, can the kid hit 2 home runs any given night? Yeah. If he doesn't get the ball thrown at his face, if Joe Kelly doesn't come into the game, am I right? But this is the way you're going to use these things to build some of these contrarian builds. And I'll leave off a couple of other. Let's look at the teams that are most exposed tonight. Minnesota, Milwaukee, LA. These are the teams that the optimizer are keying on. Now, maybe around the industry it's a little bit different, but generally speaking, Minnesota, Milwaukee, and Los Angeles should be some pretty chalky stacks. Those would be stacks I would probably lower my exposure to if I was building mass multi-entry, but they would probably be stacks that I would consider in a single entry tournament or a 3 max type of tournament. Because yes, they're going to be chalky, but I can differentiate somewhere else. If I'm looking at, say, Minnesota, let's just pretend that everywhere around the industry is just massively touting them as chalk. What am I going to do? Well, I'm going to do one of two things. I'm either going to lower my exposure to them and try and gain leverage on other teams that could go off, like St. Louis or Tampa Bay or something like that. Or I would, instead of taking one great big full stack of 4, Minnesota Twins. Say they threw this in there with Garver, right? And that's what I got was like a 1, 2, 3, 4 type of stack in Minnesota. That's going to probably be a popular stacking combination if Minnesota is a chalky team tonight. So where would I differentiate? Well, I would take fewer. I would take 3 of them. Or if I did 4 of them, I might, instead of taking 1, 2, 3, 4, I might take 1, 2, 4, 5. Something along those lines that is going to give me something different than the optimizer is spitting out. I'm going to start, maybe if I use a chalk stack, then I'm going to differentiate in it somewhere. I'm going to put a gap in there. Instead of 1, 2, 3, 4, I'll do 1, 2, 3, 5. Or I'll do 1, 3, 4, 5. Or 1, 3, 5, 6. Or something like that. Still gets me in the top of the order. Still gets me exposure to that top stack, but it's different than what everybody else is using. One of the things that I love to do, if we had a really, really expensive player, let's say like a Yelich, right? And let's say that Milwaukee was one of the big, let's find a Milwaukee stack. Looks like we've got some. They were one of the teams that was most frequently used. Maybe they're not stacked. I would have to set the optimizer up to stack them to show this example. And so it's not really going to work. But let's say that we wanted to use the top few guys in the order, in the Milwaukee order. Then I know that Hira is going to be in there. I know that Yelich is going to be in there. Let's see if we can find anybody else. Doesn't look like a lot else, but let's say that it gave me 4 guys. I would fade Christian Yelich. Why? Because everybody else that has a Milwaukee Brewers stack is going to be using Christian Yelich. So that's where I would invent that gap. I'd go 1, since he's slated for the 2 slot, I'd go 1, 3, 4, 5. And now I've freed up $4,300, $4,300 out of that stack to then use somewhere else as a one-off for, say, Mike Trout. If I had a Milwaukee stack without Yelich, I'm different. And then because those using Yelich, well, this is a bad example, but they can't typically use a Mike Trout because they don't have the money left in their salary cap if they're using somebody more expensive than a Haney, right? Like they're using a Garrett Cole or something like that. There's no way they're going to put Trout in that stack with Yelich because it's too expensive. So you fade off Yelich, have the stack around him, since they're in a good spot tonight, and plug Mike Trout or J.D. Martinez or Aaron Judge or somebody like that in that spot. because now you've differentiated yourself again. You've probably caught some lower ownership on the guy if that is truly a chalky stack. You've caught some lower ownership on your one-off as well, and you've faded the guy everybody else has. Again, these are the types of things that we can talk about inside DFS Army. These are the ways to use the optimizer to build around. You've also seen from the research station, you've seen some of the ways that we would go looking at today. I'll show you one more way, and then we're going to get out of here because we're up on 20 minutes, and I don't like running videos this long. So if I take that number off and I'm looking at these batting matchups, now I'm looking for the highest W score. Remember, sorted by descending order. And now I come over here and I want to see what team is showing up the most. San Diego, San Diego, San Diego, San Diego. Looks like San Diego's a pretty chalky stack. New York Mets pop out. Milwaukee, only one of those. So it looks like your 3 Yankees. So I've got 4 Mets, 3 Yankees, 6 Padres. Those are likely going to be the obvious plays that pop in everybody's head today. So I would consider fading Padres. Or removing the most expensive piece of the stack and then subbing in a one-off like Trout into my San Diego stack. I would be looking at decreasing ownership on the New York Mets. Now, if I look around ownership projections later today and the Mets are in this good of a spot, but nobody's on the Mets, nobody's talking about the Mets, then I'm going to load up. That's who I would probably put in my single entry contrarian build. It is certainly who I would take more exposure to than the rest of the industry in a mass multi-entry format. Again, if you see how the brain kind of works through these slates and walks through these slates, this is the type of information that we can teach you and turn you into a better player, somebody who's taking more advantage of the field in daily fantasy sports. Let the casual players, the recreational players, just get spoon-fed information. You come in here and you learn how to think differently. You learn how to think like, Jonathan Bales or Osimo or all these other names of guys that you see winning all of these contests all the time. They think differently. They have learned how to analyze the data, find the weak spots, and exploit it. Stop getting exploited and start doing the exploiting. Come in here, dfsarmy.com, use that coupon code DFSArmy. Get that 20% off discount. Start learning. Get better today. NBA's around the corner. NHL's coming up. All the sports will be up and running at the same time. It's going to be way too much information to process all at once. You're going to need our cheat sheets. You're going to need our research station. You're going to need videos like this. You're going to need information and help in being able to systematically sort through all of that stuff without blowing through your bankroll. Come give us a chance. I'll talk to you on the inside. See ya.